Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the artificial economy that's happening all across the Western world. In fact, wherever you're seeing mass migration, mass peasant migration, you're seeing this artificial economy that exists. There are now so many businesses that are not economically viable in a market-driven economy, that are only surviving, are only in existence because of mass migration. Now, a lot of these businesses are owned by people from third world peasant economies, whether they be Chinese or Indian or Bangladeshi or Pakistani or wherever, African. But what's happening is that a business that's not viable, or an industry segment that's not viable, where it's just not possible to make money in that business model, in that business sector, these people are relying on peasant labour that's being brought in and masses of it to make a non-viable business somehow temporarily viable. Now, let's look at the case of, say, a cafe, or now there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of cafes in a particular area in a area with a lot of office space and office blocks. So this particular one is owned by an Indian, and they're connected to one of the big money people in India. So it's as much a money laundering exercise as anything. So they've opened up a cafe and they're bringing out, under false pretenses, Indian cheap labour to do it. Now the company's bought a one-bedroom apartment in the city, and they have 11 Indians living there. So it's mattresses on the floor, and they're all sort of bunched together in this fairly compact one-bedroom apartment. Just 11 people using one bathroom and so on. So those are the workers for that cafe, or that small cafe restaurant. Now they're paid almost nothing. They're part of their wages are in the the premises that they stay, so that the accommodation. They eat in the restaurant, which then they're eating food that in turn becomes a tax deduction. The place that they're living in is a tax deduction, and the money that's borrowed to buy the cafe was borrowed from overseas, from India, which then uses a management fee from India to make sure there's no local profit made. The local workers pay no tax because their income falls under the minimum threshold of tax. So we've got a business that if they had to pay wages and had to hire people in a market-driven economy, that business wouldn't exist. But it does exist. It draws customers away from businesses that are viable, that would be viable in a market-driven, or are viable in a market-driven economy. But it draws customers away from them. But the benefit to, in this case, the Australian economy is zero. They impact other viable businesses that are well run and are paying market wages and are paying tax and so on. And these people, by avoiding tax, avoiding paying wages, they can come in and undercut some of these other legitimately viable businesses. Now, how this is allowed is quite beyond me, but it's widespread, and it's all across the Western world. It's not simply cafes. It could be cleaning companies. It could be companies that cut sandwiches and distribute them around to stores and supermarkets. So it's happening at all levels and in all different ways. Chinese restaurants, businesses that do collect trolleys for supermarkets. There are so many businesses around that in a market-driven economy, certainly using the model they are, would not be viable. Now there's an example of a cafe nearby this one that I'm talking about, the Indian one run, where they are paying market rates, that the employees there are paying taxes, so they've got a high enough wage, paying tax. The business, if it makes a profit, is paying taxes and so on. So And the staff may get one meal a day, but they're not getting the 3 meals a day or the multiple meals a day that the Indian guy's giving, that in turn again becomes a tax deduction. So further limiting the ability of the business or the desire of the business to pay tax. Now, this other viable business, legitimate business, they're doing a lot of creative things with the sort of cakes that they're making, and they've got some interesting flavors they add to the coffees, and they're doing some pretty creative things. They've got some, it's nicely laid out, nicely decked out. They've got higher quality staff that give better service. So they're really doing a good value add sort of business there. It's not a minimal thing, and that is viable. But nonetheless, they're losing a certain proportion of customers, potential customer base, away to this other place that is not a viable business. If they had to pay market rates, they would have to close down tomorrow. Now, this is a business model scenario that's happening also with takeout food franchises. There's a lot of money coming from places like India and China to buy up franchises, to take out fast food franchises in Australia and again across the Western world. And it's the same models being used. They're paying probably too much for the business in the first place, but they don't care because it's a money laundering exercise as much as anything. Again, the money's coming from overseas. The management fee soaks up any possible profit they might make, and again, they're bringing workers from overseas, peasant workers from rural areas, putting them 10, 15 to a one-bedroom apartment and using them to work at the place, and sometimes working long hours. I mean, some of these peasants are having to work 12 plus hours a day, and they're being paid shit money. But that's the business model. But in reality, it's a non-viable business model. They're not paying the rate of pay, the minimum rate of pay. They're not paying it, and therefore they can create an artificially viable business, given they're bypassing the rules of a market economy. Now, we're seeing the idea of a market-driven economy. For example, if we look at the industry or industries around climate change, there are vast government subsidies. I mean, billions upon billions upon billions of government subsidies that are already going to very wealthy people and big wealthy banks and so on. So these subsidies are going to, they in turn create or do some alleged bullshit technology that's going to create green energy, which hardly ever seems to work, by the way. And but they take these vast sums of taxpayer money and stuff it in their pockets with the blessing of the globalist controlled governments. Now, I'm sure the technology for green energy is going to come along one day, but it's nowhere in sight right now. And the incentive to develop it is actually quite minimal, because as long as they have not developed a workable green technology, then they can claim these massive government payouts and subsidies. And part of the subsidy is then on-costed back into the electricity price that we all have to pay. So the working class and the middle class are getting screwed royally just to create a nice wave of cash subsidies to go into the pockets of the already very wealthy. So that's a scam and a half. But again, it's not market driven. It's not viable. I mean, as soon as if you took those subsidies away from all the green energy thing, nothing would happen. It would collapse overnight. So because it's relying totally on government handouts and achieving very little in return for it, then that's another area of an artificial economy. But the amount of the proportion of the total economy that's artificial is now there's more of it than there is of the real economy. So the real economy is in full retreat, and what we could call almost a Soviet planned economy on one side, and various dispensations governments are giving to private companies who do their bidding. And it could be the media. So, well, you're putting out a lot of propaganda, pro-globalist propaganda. So the government will give you lots of taxpayer money because of that function. Or where diversity officers in universities who are low IQ stooge flunkies, but because they're performing a service for the globalists, they're being paid $400,000 a year, whereas an engineer doing a real job is paid half that. So the artificial economy is expanding at a rate of knots under the globalist watch, whereas the real economy, the economy that creates wealth, where there's real risk, there's real effort, there's real reward, all these, this is all in retreat, and we're all going to pay a heavy price for it. And if we look at the the inflation that's going on at the moment, and the need to print money and then print more money and so on, and the confines of where appreciation occurs. If the big banks own lots of property, then property conveniently appreciates in price, delivering windfall profits to them. So that this is again a reflection of the artifice in the economy, where market forces are not driving this, far from it. So until we return to a situation where the market forces and the price signals and the practical reality of market economics is re-embraced, if you like, in the West, then we're all heading for the cliff and to the abyss at a rate of knots. I mean, and part of this is bringing millions upon millions of black, brown peasants into the West when they're not needed. They're useless. They're completely surplus to requirements. But what they're doing is artificially dampening wages, but more importantly, creating this massive substructure in the economy of completely artificial jobs, artificial businesses that cannot exist and would not exist in a real market economy. It's a serious problem, and it's going to have to be addressed at some point. You've been with Tacitus today, a Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.